Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we are looking, as you can see, what we're looking at is the Torah Tamima on verse 3 of chapter 12, where God says, I will bless those who bless you and curse the one who curses you, and I will make your name great, etc. And we've been looking at some interesting takes on some of the implications or trying to understand better. Again, one of my favorite words, deconstruct.
Is that Abraham you're talking about?
Yes, that God says to Abraham, when he starts his journey, I will bless you. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse the one who curses you. And what
Oh,
we're trying to do is we're trying to deconstruct exactly what does that mean? What are the implications of that particular statement? All right. So we looked at one, which was very interesting, a halacha about Birkat Hamazon, right? Because it's called, it used to be done over wine, and it was called kos shel bracha, a glass, a cup of blessing. And that is just as we make kiddush over the wine before the meal, on a Shabbat, at a meal where you eat bread, there was a tradition, or is a tradition of making grace after meals, thanking God for the meal you've just eaten over a cup of wine. And wine essentially symbolizes joy and joy. All right. So anyway, moving on a little bit, changing the subject a little bit, but we actually referred to this yesterday. ואברכה מברכך. I will bless those, as God speaking right to Abraham. I will bless those who bless you. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Joshua, son of Levi, who, by the way, is one of my favorite Amoraim. I love so much of what he says. But he said, this is what he said, Kol cohen shemevarech mitbarech. Any priest who blesses, and you know that the priests were commanded to bless the Jewish people, mitbarech is a form of a verb that is reflexive. So mitbarech means is blessed himself. Any priest who blesses is blessed themselves.
hmm.
V'she'eno mevarech, and one who does not bless, eno mitbarech, will not be blessed themselves. Now that's going to require some further explanation, especially if you are familiar with what we read yesterday. It doesn't say that he is cursed. It just says he is not blessed, and we will see what's involved here. Shneimar, how do I know this? Because of the verse that we just read. It says, Va'avarcha mevarchecha. I will bless those who bless you. So if the priest blesses the Jewish people, he will be blessed himself. And that's in Tractate Sota, the Babylonian Talmud, page 38b. All right, so let's take a look. So we're on to, looks like, I'm gonna guess that looks like a Vav. I think it's right here. Let's find the place. Right, right here, right here. Tzarich lomar, we have to understand this. We have to say to Ire that we're talking here. What's the context of this particular statement? It is talking about she'eno mit mivarech, that this priest is not able or is not going to bless mishum ezosiba for some reason. In other words, there's some legitimate reason as to why this priest is not blessing, is not engaged. And I think here we're basically talking about that formal way in which a priest blesses Israelites, Jewish people. And he gives you examples. Kagon, for example, Mishum Mum, because he has some kind of problem. He has I'm trying to think, a blemish, because he has some sort of blemish. And if a priest is blemished, they are not allowed to go up on the altar. There's a passage in the Torah itself that describes various kinds of blemishes for which a priest is not permitted to actually perform sacrifices. Are they are they still entitled to benefit from those parts that go to a priest? Yes, they are. But if they themselves are physically blemished in some way, they are not allowed to actually serve. So this priest is not blessing. He's not able to bless because of a particular blemish he has, or mishum avelut, or because he is in mourning. And the Torah also talks about the fact that if a priest is in mourning, they do not perform the priestly duties. They're excused from their priestly duties so that they can mourn, uchedome, in similar situations. Essentially, we're saying circumstances beyond his control. That's important to note. Us, and in this case, hu rak eino mitbarech, we would say simply that he is not blessed. Aval gam eino bichlal klala. But it's not to say that he's cursed. We're not saying he's cursed. Remember, mesh eino chen, which would not be the case. In other words, he would be cursed, im belo kol siba, if he were not doing it for some reason, he didn't want to bless. In other words, if he didn't want to bless, but it wasn't because of circumstances beyond his control, he didn't want to bless. In this case, us, then, ugam bichlal klala, then he's included the people that are cursed. So understand this very carefully, that when it says he is not blessed, it just means he doesn't get special treatment, as it were, from the divine for having blessed. Umikalelcha aror. He then comes under the category of the latter part of that verse that says, "And the one who curses you, I will curse." God is saying that, right? Ve'ien and vide. Look, check out. Mashikatuv bidrasha hakodemet. Look at what was written in the previous verse. Remember that previous commentary that he wrote. We read that yesterday, and this involved a person who refused to do the Birkat Hamazon, a guest who was invited by the host to do the grace after meals and refused to do it. And that meant that it said his days would be shortened. But that's not what we're talking about here, and that's important to understand. Okay, and I think that's it as far as the Torah Tumya. Yes, that's all there is to say as far as this particular little thing. So let's go on to
question.
please,
I have
of
a question.
course. Yes, certainly.
So, I missed the discussion on not you were asked to lead the Birkat Hamazon, and you said no.
If you are a guest in someone's home, you've just eaten from their food, they've provided you with a meal, and they've asked you to lead the Birkat Hamazon, and you refuse.
Because you're embarrassed.
That's a different reason. Then you wouldn't be included. Then you would say to the host, "Please excuse me. I feel embarrassed. I'm not able to do it." Okay? But the host should not have asked you. The host should have done some homework. But if for example, I'm capable of leading the Birkat Hamazon, and if I go to someone's home and I eat a meal at their table, right? I've just sat down and had a formal meal at their table, and they honor me. It's an honor for me to then do the Birkat Hamazon, and I say, "No, thanks. Don't want to do it." Okay? And the point is that the reason I don't want to do it is because I don't really like this person. And what was discussed yesterday is I don't like this person, but I'm eating the person's meal. And I didn't say this yesterday, but I think it's worth bringing out today, that in some ways, our table where we sit down to a formal meal is an altar. An altar. It's a sacred act. Being able to have food to sustain ourselves, right, you can elevate it to a sacred act. And so, in a sense, leading the Birkat Hamazon, and this is the point Torah Tamima brings out yesterday, is that one of the lines in the Birkat Hamazon is, Harachaman hu yivarich et bal habayit hazeh. It's may the merciful one bless this, the
Okay.
host. right? And his family. And I'm not saying that now. And by the way, I was reflecting more on this. Judith, I'm so appreciate you were bringing these things out. I was reflecting more on, how often I've talked about appreciation and how appreciation is so, so important, right? Well, you've just eaten that somebody has worked and is providing you with sustenance and a meal. And there's trouble involved. You know what's involved in cooking and stuff. There's a lot involved. And you don't want to just simply, accept and honor that this person's honoring you with that ability to lead the Birkat Hamazon. Now, the circumstance you're talking about, remember always, circumstances alter cases, right? So here, if you're embarrassed, and understandably, not everybody's capable of doing it, and they would be embarrassed. Okay, and that's a legitimate reason. But here, the understanding is, in the context that we were reading yesterday, the understanding was that the circumstance was because you don't like this guy. You've accepted their invitation. You've accepted the fact that they're providing you with food. I mean, look, it could be a very large thing, like a bar mitzvah luncheon or something, where, it's not just at a person's home, but where you're talking about a lot of people and you went there even though you don't like the person and his family, etc. And yet here they are asking you to lead the Birkat Hamazon for this large group. And you don't have enough appreciation for what they've done. In fact, Torah Tanima says you're showing hatred, right? You're showing cruelty is the way he uses, the word he uses, on two levels. One is that you've taken advantage of the person's generosity, and the second piece of cruelty is that you're refusing to do something, he doesn't put it quite like this, but you're refusing the honor he's just given you in asking you to lead Birkat Hamazon. Okay? And Judith, is this addressing your concerns?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I have not lived with enough circumstances where you say the Birkat Hamazon
I know.
that I would understand that without
Right.
your
Well, without Torah Tmimas, right? I mean, I'm merely a messenger.
yes,
Right?
you're
But that,
bringing yes.
uh, and Judith, this is such a beautiful example of Talmud Torah keneged kulam, right? Of why it's such a mitzvah to study Torah, because otherwise one doesn't know. And I learned this at a very young age. I think I was still a school age at that point, that there's a principle, a universal principle. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. I didn't know I was supposed to stop at a red light. Try that one on the arresting officer. Try that one. I didn't know I was supposed to stop, right? But there are, I mean, life involves rules, and otherwise, good Lord. Well, we can see what happens when you don't follow the rules. It just starts to come apart at the seams. So, but the thing I like about it, just sort of to shift a little bit, is this delightful way in which we're being introduced to this stuff, at least in my humble opinion. Okay. Onwards we go. We'll take another one. For Avarcha Mevarchecha. So again, we're looking at this and deconstructing, right? Ketiv, it is written, Parshat Naso, that's in the book of Numbers, right? That's actually where we find the priestly benediction, right? That's where we find the words for Yevarechacha Hashem v'yishmerecha, etc., where the priests are formally instructed as to how to bless the Jewish people, right? It says, Ko tevachu ibnei Israel. Thus you shall bless the children of Israel. Lamadnu bracha Israel. So here we learn how the Jewish people are blessed, which leaves a question, which is, next page, bracha kohanim minayin. But how do we know about the priests? How do we know that the priests themselves are blessed? Where are they getting a blessing? Right. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, said Rav Nachman, son of Yitzchak, there we go. We got the answer. I will bless those who bless you, right? And the you, of course, is Abraham's descendants, the Jewish people. And it says, God says, I will bless those. So that's how we know that the priests themselves, in the act of blessing the Jewish people, are blessed themselves. And that's from Tractate Chulin, page 49a. And we're going to take it going, I think, yeah. And here's the footnote right there. There's the footnote right at the beginning. Ve'iyeh lefanenu, right? And check out ahead of us, in other words, look further on, the Parshat Naso, in that Parsha of Naso, in Numbers, the pasuk va'ani avachem. It goes on to say, "I will bless them." In other words, after that, after it says that, so you will bless them, etc., and I will bless them. Meaning, the simple context is that the priests are a conduit by which God will bless the Jewish people. Okay. That's the conduit. That's in a sense what God is saying is that the priests are able to in practicing the priestly benediction, it is an effective blessing, right? Vekatfu ha-tosafot, right? And the Tosafot, that is, of course, we said we're quoting from the Talmud, and on that Talmud page, there's Rashi, and there's also on the other side Tosafot, Rashi's grandchildren, who add very, very deep ideas to what is said, and very often they're involved in novella, what are called novella, meaning new ideas that are springing from the laws that are there. At any rate, it says, "Vezeh shunam." In other words, he's saying, quote, right? Because there are no quotation marks in the Hebrew, right? "Vezeh shunam." This is what they say, quote, "V'afilu nochrim hamevarchin et Yisrael." This doesn't just apply to priests, it even applies to non-Jews. That if a non-Jew blesses a Jewish person, the non-Jew is blessed, which is a remarkable statement, more in terms of the fact that it's never explicitly stated, right? It's only implied, and that Tosafot are stating it explicitly, and in a time you should understand contextually, where Jews were in exile and not always treated so nicely, and not being very euphemistic by saying that. But it's saying, when a non-Jew blesses a Jewish person, the non-Jew, is blessed, right? Mitbachim, they themselves are blessed. Kedita, this is all what the Tosafot is saying. We're quoting the Tosafot. Kedita b'Yerushalmi, as we find in the Jerusalem Talmud, and believe me, we're now saying, not only are Tosafot familiar with the Babylonian Talmud, which is huge, they're also familiar with the Jerusalem Talmud, okay? And that's even more arcane and difficult than the Babylonian Talmud. Brachot, here's the reference, right? Kedeita b'Yerushalmi brachot, as is in the Tractate Talmud Yerushalmi, Tractate Brachot, and this is Perek Chet. The way the Jerusalem Talmud is organized is by chapters and by subsections, and their subsections are called halachot, right? So the hey here is halacha, Perek, pay for Perek, chapter Chet 8, halacha Chet. Halacha 8. In other words, subsection 8. And this is all quoting from Tosafot. Hahu Nochri, there was a certain Gentile, de Yehiv Shalma Rabbi Yishmael, who greeted, and I think literally it means who gave peace, right? So in other words, by greeting Rabbi Yishmael, but using that in that greeting, he was blessing Rabbi Yishmael. Amarle, he said to him, right? That is, Rabbi Yishmael said to this Gentile, Milatcha kfar amura, right? Your word is already stated. That's the word, that's, quote, what Rabbi Yishmael said to him. Pirush, we should understand that by that, Rabbi Yishmael meant, Eini tzarich lachazir lecha shalom. I don't actually have to say hello back to you. I don't have to say shalom back to you. Shebirchatcha kvar amura, because your blessing is already said. The moment you said shalom to me, you yourself had shalom. You yourself was blessing Averecha Mevarchecha, because it says, quote, I will bless those who bless you. Ad kan l'shonam. That is the end of the quote from Tosafot. V'lefanenu b'Yerushalmi, and before us in the Yerushalmi, muva hapasuk, the verse is brought, umevarchecha baruch, okay, the sof perek toldot, right? So it doesn't say, remember, this isn't avarechacha, right? Whatever, right? It's umevarchecha baruch. Those who bless you will be blessed, right? The ones who bless you will be blessed. The Sof Perek Toldot, which you find at the end of not Perek, I'm sorry, end of Parsha Toldot. Parsha Toldot is the chapters of section in Genesis that essentially deal with the life of Isaac. But the life of Isaac basically is the birth of Jacob and Esau, right? Their constant competitiveness, right? And then how after Isaac wants to bless Esau, and Jacob tricks Isaac into blessing him, etc. And part of that blessing with which Isaac blesses Jacob, it says, "Umevarachecha baruch." That's the words he uses. Okay, and so it's saying, it doesn't quite apply. That is to say, this section here where we're saying, uh, where it says, sorry, what is it here? Sorry, let me go back. Where it says, avarechacha, sorry, let's go here. Let's find the place. Va'avarcha mevarchecha. That's not what it says in Toldot, but here we are, quoting, saying Rabbi Yishmael, was basing it on this particular principle, right? That those who bless you will be blessed, right? But technically speaking, it's actually based on a different passage. That's kind of what we're saying, right? So let's get back into this, right? Okay. And that's the point he makes. And we'll take a look at it. But when we get to Parshat Tolot, Torah Mima's telling us we'll deal with it. Vida. So it goes on to say now, Vida, and realize, no, the ita b'midrashim, that in midrashim, there's this, of course, this whole literature of midrashim, of commentaries on or interpretations of the Torah. Besof Parshat Toldot, at the end in the Midrash, where it's commenting at the end of Parshat Toldot. And I said that's where Isaac is blessing Jacob. Bebirchat Yitzchak liYaakov, where Isaac is blessing Jacob. Or Arerecha, I'm trying to think of, or Orerechach Arur. Those who curse you will be cursed. Umevarachecha baruch. So the whole thing there says, the whole phrase is, those who curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed. Shehe'iru, they point out in that midrash that discusses these words of Isaac to Jacob, they point out that if you look at a very parallel statement by Bilam, right, in Numbers, you're familiar with those passages, Ketiv, it says there, Mevarachecha baruch v'orarecha arur. There, it reverses it. It says, so Bilam, when he's blessing the Jewish people, remember, he wants to curse them, but he's forced by God to bless them, right? Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. Ikdim bracha liklala. Notice the reversal of that phrase. In other words, here he puts those who bless you first and those who curse you second. But when Isaac blessed Jacob, he put, right, uva Yitzchak, but when Isaac did it, hikdim klala levarcha. He says, those who curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed. He reverses it. V'tirtzu, and they explain the distinction. Why the reversal, right? Mishum de tzadikim, their explanation in these midrashim is that tzadikim, that with righteous people, tchilatam yisurim, that in general, right, when it comes to the righteous, their beginnings, the starts of their lives are in adversity, right, tribulation, Usofan shalva, but in the end, they have contentment. Allow me for a moment to just put in parenthesis totally, where I grew up in Durban, South Africa, and the motto of the city of Durban was Debile Principium, let's see, Melior Fortuna Sequatur, something like that. Forgive my Latin, my fractured Latin, but what it meant was bad beginnings, good fortune to follow. And it had to do with the beginnings of the city of Durban and its history. That was the motto. At any rate, similar to this was the reason why I'm sharing it, right? Lachain, and for this reason, getting back to this idea, higdim klala livracha, that is why Isaac began with the klala, with the curse, livracha, and followed it by the blessing, because Isaac was a righteous person. Uverishaim, but when it comes to people who are wicked, tchilatam shalva, they begin with contentment. They think that they're going to enjoy happiness by the wicked means in which they achieve success, right? Vesofan yisurin, but finally, later on, it's going to have tribulation. They're going to have to face tribulation. Lachen hikdim bracha leklala, and because Bilam was a wicked person, that's why he preceded with a blessing and then followed it with a curse. Adkan. That's the end of what they say in these midrashim. V'tzarich iyun. And Torah Tamima says, hold on a second. We need to look further into this. Mikan, right? Why? Sheikdim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Abraham. Look at this. God himself, right, proceeds when he talks to Abraham, Bibracha. He starts off by talking about a blessing, V'siyem biklala, and he ends with those who curse, right? So God is switching it, doing it this way. Little bit of a, okay. Ve'efshar yesh lomar. And we're going to come up with a solution. One could say, it's possible that one could say, Mishum, the reason is, the Avraham kvar saval ad kol yisurim. The reason is that Abraham in his own life had, by the time God was saying this to him, had already had to endure, right, this trouble, adversity. He had endured adversity. What are we talking about? Kenoda ba'agadot, because we have, it's not in the Torah itself, but there are agadot, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with these legends. Mehapalatol lekivshan, the words in the Torah which talk about ur kasdim, right, which is a sort of, ur is a furnace, right, and that in fact he was thrown into the furnace by Nimrod much earlier on. Livkiv shan ha'esh. He was thrown into the fiery furnace. Vetil tulo, metal tulo, and his wandering. That was Yisurim ugeluto, and the fact that he had to leave his father's house, his exile, va'od, and similar, that Abraham had to endure a lot of adversity before God was saying this to him. V'imkein, and if that's the case, kfar saval erech yisurim, he had already endured this quality of adversity, right? Shederech hatzadikim lisbol mitchila, just as righteous people have to endure at the beginning. V'lachein lo chash liftoch etzlo bivracha. And for this reason, God didn't for a moment have to think twice about beginning with a blessing to Abraham at this point in his life, because he'd already endured the tribulations. That would not have been the case when Isaac blessed Jacob, ad setomi beit aviv, up to the point where he had to depart from his father's house. Haya yoshev b'shalva. He was pretty contented living at home with his parents up to this point where he now had to escape. V'gam yesh lomar. Not only that, you could add further, pashut, straightforward, that it does make sense to precede with the blessing and then end with a curse. Why? In other words, that you want to put the blessing first. That's the first thing you want to do before you mention curses. Because you find in many places, right, in the Torah, that the blessing precedes the curse. Look at the blessings and curses we just read in Parshat Ki Tavo, right? It starts off with a blessing and then goes on to say, but if you don't do it, these are the curses. And it does this a few times. Havracha v'haklala. And not only that, Moses refers to the blessing and the curse. Rak Yitzchak b'siyum dvarav. However, when it came to Isaac, so Isaac's the exception, right? It only with Isaac, b'siyum dvarav, when he concluded his words, lo ratzah l'sayim ba'arur. He didn't want that his last words to his son should be curse. V'hafach haseder, and for that reason, he reversed the normal order in which you start and end. Okay, so Bilam, that explanation about Bilam in the Midrash is an explanation regarding righteous people and wicked people. But in general, you really do want to start with good words, blessing, and then you have to discuss the reverse. Mizeh ula yesh samach, right? And from this, what we've just said, possibly one might say that there is some way to rely, right? It's a support. Leminhag bnei Yisrael, for a minhag, a custom of the children of Israel, l'sayem amoratehem bidvar tov, to end what they say with a good word. That when you have a conversation, etc., you want to end with something good. So this is going back to the way in which Isaac was talking to Jacob, that the last words should be something good, something positive. V'lochen asa Bilam. That was not what Bilam was doing. Harasha, the wicked Bilam, shesiyem dvarav ba'arur v'lo b'baruch, that he concluded his words with cursed and not with blessed. And that is it for today. So I'll just mark the spot for next time. Okay. Any parting words? Yes, David. Yes.
So throughout this whole thing, because I've heard a little bit of this before, but does that mean that people who do grow up, let's say privileged, their blessed early part of life will always or will wind up, especially if they're not righteous people, they will wind up, cursed. I mean, they'll wind up in unfortunate circumstances, because there are some people that, we have history where they've grown up, privileged, and they stay privileged. But then there are always the cases where, you see people that have grown up privileged and content, and then they wind up, at the end, desolate, things like that. So how does all that apply? Because that's where I was struggling with those passages.
Got it. Okay. So essentially, remember, we're talking about good people and wicked people, all right? But the truth is that everyone has to face adversity at some time in their lives, okay? But let's talk about someone who grows up, privileged. Privileged in and of itself doesn't mean wicked, right? It means
Right.
blessed. It means blessed.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
And honestly, it could be that as they work things out, they actually are blessed all the way through. That they understand that their blessing is a privilege. And so they start off with righteousness, but and remember, we're making general comments. And it's interesting if I was looking carefully at what Torah Tamima was saying, and he was saying perhaps, or it's possible. In other words, he wasn't saying, definitely compelling arguments, etc. He's saying in general, right? He's saying by and large, this is the way things work out. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. That's what you're referring to. But it's more of an exceptional situation. And I think there's something else that's being said here very often, because the Jewish people were going through such difficulties for so many centuries, and we shouldn't limit it to this life. So the rabbis definitely were not saying, well, if you suffer at the beginning of your life, the rest of your life will work out well. They were talking also about the world to come. And because the fact is that there was an argument out there culturally that the reason why the Jewish people were suffering was they deserved it. That the reason, because they were rejected of God, they had rejected God, and God was rejecting them. And forgive me, because unfortunately, historically, it is true that Christians were saying this about Jews. That because they had crucified Jesus, this is why they were deserving. And in order to, I think, build up morale of the people, because you can only imagine how low the morale was, we're saying, don't be overly concerned about the fact that life is so tough now. It may be tough now, but if you in fact live as a righteous person and you're enduring great, adversity, there's something good ahead of you. Don't you worry. It's going to be okay. Maybe not even in this life, but you will ultimately face contentment and happiness.
That helps. Thank you.
Yeah. I have to tell you, in my own personal life, I had some very painful years especially in the early years of public school. But essentially, my entire public school experience was painful. Very, very painful. But the truth is, there were lessons that I needed to learn. Don't get me wrong. I don't know how righteous I am. That's for God to judge, etc. But hopefully, I am trying. Hopefully, the issue is, am I better than I was a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Well, let's hope the vector is the right vector. There are statements that say, you can never just relax and say, I'm a righteous person. No more problems. Well, you never can. Things can happen and you can change direction if you're not careful. If you're not very, very careful. People's lives can get overturned in an instant. So, but I will tell you, I am extremely grateful and I'm so grateful to God for so many blessings. And I feel that those experiences in my earlier childhood years were there to teach me some very valuable lessons. And I'm grateful for them too. Maybe I'm getting too personal, and I apologize.
No, it's appreciate that you can at least share that. I mean, without a lot of detail, and it helps. I mean, I think that people, and of course it's not it's not necessarily a discrete events either, right? Because people go
No.
through adversity, right? But I mean, also at various times of your life, you go through adversity.
Right.
You have, prosperity, you might go back to it. It's just like, it just depends on where you're at in that continuum, right?
Right.
And so, and then trying to judge it in terms of, kind of looking at the overall, how did it end up overall, right? And that's really where we which is kind of what we have to look at. So anyway, so thanks for sharing that.
Of course. No, I mean, and obviously you could tell how much I enjoyed what Torah Tamima had to share with us today. And, I think how valuable a lesson it really is. So anyway, thank you. And
Friday?
yes, indeed. Friday it
Okay.
is.